Chapter 19. Montgomery's Bank Holiday. When this was accomplished, we had then washed and eaten. Montgomery and I went into a little room and seriously discussed our position for the first time. It was then near midnight. He was almost sober, but greatly disturbed in his mind. He had been strangely under the influence of Moreau's personality. I do not think it had ever occurred to him that Moreau could die. This disaster was the sudden collapse of habits that had become a part of his nature in the 10 or more monstrous years he had spent in the island. He had talked vaguely, answered my questions crookedly, wandered into several questions. "This silly ass of a world," he said. "What a muddle it is. I haven't had any life. I wonder when it's going to begin. 16 years being bullied by nurses and schoolmasters at their own sweet will. 5 in London, grinding hard at medicine, bad food, shabby lodgings, shabby clothes, shabby vice, a blunder. I didn't know any better. I had hustled off to this beastly island. 10 years here. What for it all, Pendrick? And are we bubbles blown away by a baby?" It was hard to deal with such ravings. "The thing we have to think of now," I said, "is how to get away from this island. What's the good of getting away? If I'm an outcast, where am I to join? It's all very well to you, Pendrick. Poor old Moreau. We can't leave him here to just have his bones picked, and as it is, and besides, what will become of the decent part of the beast folk?" "Well," I said, "that will do tomorrow. I've been thinking we make the brushwood into pyre and burn his body, and the other things that will happen. Then what will happen with the beast folk? I don't know. I suppose that they were made a beast of prey will make silly asses of themselves sooner or later. We can't massacre the lot, can we? I suppose what's your humanity would suggest, but they'll change. They are sure to change." He talked thus inconclusively until I last felt my temper going. "Damnation!" he exclaimed. At some petulant of mine. "Can't you see I'm in a worse hole than you are?" And he got up and went for a brandy. "Drink," he said, returning. "You logic-chopping, chalky-faced saint of an atheist. Drink!" "Not I," said, and sat grimly, watching his face under the yellow paraffin flare, as he drank himself into a glorious misery. I have a memory of infinite tedium. I wandered into a maudlin defense of these people, of Mling, he said, was only the thing he ever really cared for him. And suddenly an idea came to him. "I'm damned," he said, staggering at his feet and clutching a brandy bottle. By some flash of intuition, he knew what he intended. "You don't give a drink to that beast," I said, rising and facing him. "Beast," he said. "You're the beast. He takes his liquor like a Christian. Come out of the way, Pendrick." "For God's sake," I said. "Get out of the way," he roared, and suddenly whipped out his revolver. "Very well," I said, and stood aside, half-minded to fall upon him as he put his hand upon the latch, but deterred by the thought of my useless arm. "You've made a beast of yourself. To the beast you may go." He flung the doorway open and stood halfway facing me between the yellow lamp light and the pallid glare of the moon. His eye sockets were blotches of black under the stubby eyebrows. "You're a solemn prigs, Pendrick, a silly ass. You're always fearing and fancying. We're on the edge of things. I'm bound to cut my throat tomorrow. I'm going to have a damned bank holiday tonight." He turned and went into the moonlight. "Mling," he cried. "Mling, old friend!" 3 dimmed creatures in the silvery light came along the edge of the one beach. One a white-wrapped creature, and the other 2 blotches of blackness following it. They halted, staring. Then I saw Mling, hunched soldiers, as he came around the corner of the house. "Drink," cried Montgomery. "Drink, you brutes! Drink and be men! Damn, I'm the cleverest. Moreau forgot this. This is the last touch. Drink, I tell you. And waving the bottle in his hand, he started to at a kind of quick trot and westward, Muling ranging himself between him and the three dim creatures who followed. I went to the doorway. They were already indistinct in the mist of the moonlight before Montgomery halted. I saw administer a dose of raw brandy to Muling, and I saw 5 figures melt into one vague patch. Sing, I heard Montgomery shout. Sing all together. Confound old Predrick. That's right. Now again, confound old Predrick. The black group broke up into 5 separate figures and wound slowly away from me along the beach of Shining Beach. Each went howling at his own sweet will, yelping insults at me, or giving whatever other vent of this new inspiration of brandy demand. Presently, I heard Montgomery's voice shouting, "Right turn!" And they passed with their shouts and howls to the blackness of the landward trees. Slowly, very slowly, they receded into silence. The peaceful splendor of that night healed again. The moon was now the meridian and traveling down west. It was full and very bright, riding through the empty blue sky. The shadow of the well lay, a yard wide in inky blackness at my feet. The eastward sea was a featureless gray, dark and mysterious, and between the sea and the shadow of the gray sands, a volcanic glass and crystals flashed and shone like a beach of diamonds. Behind me was the paraffin lamp, flared hot and ruddy. Then I shut the door, locked it, and went into the enclosure where Moreau had lay beside his latest victims, the staghounds and the llama and some other wretched brutes. With his massive face calm even after his terrible death, and his hard eyes open, staring at a dead white moon above, I sat down upon the edge of the sink. And with my eyes upon the ghastly pile of silvery light and ominous shadows, began to over my plans. And in the morning I would gather some provisions in the dingy, and after setting fire to the pyre before me, brush out unto this desolation and of a high sea once more. I felt that for Montgomery there was no help, and that he was, in truth, half akin to the beast folk, unfitted for human kindred. I do not know how long I sat there scheming, but it must have been an hour or so. Then my planning was interrupted by the return of Montgomery to my neighborhood. I heard a yelling from my throat, a tumult of exultant cries passing down towards the beach, whooping and howling and excited shrieks, and seemed to come to a stop at the water's edge. The riot rose and fell. I heard heavy blows splintering a smash of wood, but it did not trouble me then. A discordant chanting began. My thoughts went back to my means of escape. I got up, brought the lamp, and went to the shed to look for some kegs I had seen there. Then I became interested in the contents of some biscuitins, and opened one. I saw out of the tail of my eye a red figure, and turned sharply. Behind me lay the yard, vividly black and white in the moonlight, and a pile of wood and faggots on which Moreau had mutilated his victims lay, one over another. They seemed to be gripping one another and in one last vengeful grapple. His wounds gaped, black as night, and the blood had dripped, lay in black patches upon the sand. Then I saw, without understanding the cause of my phantom, a ruddy glow that came into and danced and went upon the opposite wall. I misinterpreted it in this reflection of my flickering lamp, and turned again to the stores of the shed. I went on rummaging among them, as well as one armed man could, finding this convenient thing, and that, putting them aside for tomorrow's launch. My movements were slow. The time passed quickly. Insensibly, the daylight crept upon me, and the chanting died down, giving place to the clamor. Then it began again, and suddenly broke into a tumult. I heard cries of more, more, a sound like quarreling, and the sudden wild shriek. The quality of the sounds changed so greatly that it arrested my attention. I went out into the yard and listened. Then, cutting like a knife across the confusion, came the crack of a revolver. I rushed at once to my room in the little doorway. As I did so, I heard a packing cases behind me go sliding down and smash together at the clatter of a glass at the floor shed. But I did not heed these. I flung the door open and looked out. Up the beach lay a boathouse, and a bonfire was burning, raining up sparks and indistinctness of the dawn. Around this struggle mass of black figures, I heard Montgomery call my name. I began to run at once towards the fire, revolver in hand. I saw the pink tongue of Montgomery's pistol lick out once, close to the ground. He was down. I shouted with all my strength and fired into the air. I heard someone cry, "The master!" He nodded. Black struggle broke into scattering units. The fire leapt and sank down. The crowd of beast people fled in a sudden panic before me, up the beach. In my excitement, I fired at their retreating backs as they disappeared among the bushes. Then they turned to the black heaps upon the ground. Montgomery lay on his back, with the hairy gray beastmen sprawling across his body. The brute was dead, but still gripping Montgomery's throat with its curving claws. By near lay Mei-Ling on his face and quite still, his neck bitten open and the upper part of the smashed brandy bottle in his hand. Two other figures lay near the fire, one motionless and the other groaning pitifully. Every now and then I raised its head slowly, and then dropping it again. I caught a hold of the gray man and pulled off Montgomery's body. His claws were torn down the coat reluctantly as I dragged away. Montgomery was dark and in the face and scarcely breathing. I splashed seawater on his face and pillowed his head on my rolled-up coat. Mei-Ling was dead. The wounded creature by the fire was a wolf brute with a bearded gray face. Found it with a forepart of its body was still growing ember. The wretched thing was injured so dreadfully that in mercy I blew its brains out at once. The other brute was one of the bullmen, swathed in white. He too was dead. The rest of the beast people had vanished from the beach. I went to Montgomery again and knelt beside him, cursing my ignorance of medicine. The fire beside me had sunk down, and only charred beams of timber glowing at the central ends and mixed with gray ash and bushwood remained. I wandered casually where Montgomery had got this wood. Then I saw that the dawn was upon us. The sky had grown brighter. The set moon was becoming pale and opaque in the luminous blue of day. The sky eastward was rimmed with red. Suddenly I heard a thud and a hissing behind me, and looking around, sprang to my feet with a cry of horror. Against the warm great dawn, great tumultuous masses of black smoke were boiling up in the enclosure, and through their stormy darkness shot flickering threads of blood-red flame. Then thatched roof caught. They saw the curving charge and the flames across the sloping straw. A spurt of fire jetted out from the window of my room. I knew at once what had happened. I remember the crash I had heard, and when I had rushed out to Montgomery's assistance, I had overturned the lamp. The hopelessness of saving any other contents of the enclosure stared me in the face, and my mind came back to the plan of flight, and turning swiftly, I looked to see where the two boats lay upon the beach. They were gone. Two axes lay upon the sands beside me. Chips and splinters were scattered broadcast, and The ashes of the bonfire were blackening and smoking under the dawn. Montgomery had burned the boats to revenge himself upon me and prevent our return to mankind. A sudden convulsion of rage shook me. I almost moved to batter in his foolish head as they lay there helpless at my feet. Then suddenly his hand moved, so feebly, so pitifully that my wrath vanished. He groaned, opened his eyes for a minute, and I knelt beside him and raised his hand. He opened his eyes again, staring silently at the dawn, and then they met mine. The lids fell. "Sorry," he said presently with an effort. He seemed to be trying to think. "The last," he murmured, "the last of this silly universe. What a mess." I listened. His head fell helplessly to one side. I thought some drink might revive him, but there was neither drink nor vessel in which to bring drink at hand. He seemed suddenly heavier. My head went cold. I bent down to his face, put my hand through the rent of his blouse. He was dead, and even he died a line of white heart, and the limb of the sun rose eastward beyond the projection of the bay, splashing its radiance across the sky and turning the dark sea into a weltering tumult of dazzling light. It fell like a glory upon his death-shrunken face. I let his head fall greatly upon the rough pillow I had made for him, and stood up. Before me was the glittering desolation of the sea, an awful solitude upon which I had already suffered so much. Behind me the island, hushed under the dawn, its beast people silent and unseen. The enclosure, with all its provisions and ammunition, burnt noisily, and with sudden gusts of flame, a fitful crackling, and then a crash, and heavy smoke drove up the beach away from me, rolling low over the distant treetops and the huts of the ravine. Beside me were the charred vestiges of the boat and these 5 dead bodies. Then out of the bushes came the beast people, with hunched shoulders protruding their heads, misshapen hands awkwardly held, and inquisitive, friendly eyes, and advanced towards me with hesitating gestures. Chapter 20. Alone with the Beast Folk. I faced these people, facing my fate in them, single-handed now, literally single-handed, for I had broken my arm. In my pocket was a revolver with 2 empty chambers. Among the chips scattered about the beach lay 2 axes that had been used to chop up the boats. The tide was creeping behind me. There was nothing for it but courage. I looked squarely into the faces of the advancing monsters. They avoided my eyes, and their quivering nostrils investigated the bodies that lay on the beach. I took a half-dozen steps, picked up the blood-stained whip that lay beneath the body of the wolfman, and cracked it. They stopped and stared at me. "Salute," I said. "Bow down." They hesitated. One bent on its knees, and I repeated my command. With my heart on my mouth, I advanced upon them. One knelt, and then the other 2. I turned and walked towards the dead bodies, keeping my face towards the 3 kneeling beastmen, very much as an actor passing up the stage faces the audience. "They broke the law," I said, putting my foot on the sayer of the law. "They have been slain, even the sayer of the law, even the other with the whip. Great is the law. Come and see." "None escape," said one of them, advancing and peering. "None escape," I said. "Therefore hear and do as I command." They stood up, looking questioningly at one another. "Stand there," I said. I picked up the hatchets and swung them at their heads before the sling of my arm, turned Montgomery over, picked up his revolver, and loaded in 2 chambers. And bending down to rummage, found a half-dozen cartridges in his pocket. "Take him," I said, standing up and pointing with the whip. "Take him and carry him out to cast him into the sea. They came forward, evidently still afraid of Montgomery, but still more afraid of my cracking red whiplash, and after some fumbling hesitation, with some whip crackling and shouting, they lifted him gingerly, carried him down towards the beach, and went splashing into the dazzling welter of the sea. "On," I said, "on! Carry him far!" They went in up on their armpits and stood regarding me. "Let's go." "Let go," I said, and the body of Montgomery vanished in a splash. Something seemed to tighten across my chest. "Good," I said, with a break in my voice, and they came back, hurrying and fearful, to the margin of the water, leaving long wakes the black in the silver. At the water's edge they stopped, turning and glaring into the sea, though they presently expected Montgomery to arise therefrom as the exact vengeance. "Now these," I said, pointing to the other bodies, they took care not to approach the place where they had thrown Montgomery into the water, but instead carried the 4 dead beast people slantingly along the beach, and for perhaps 100 yards before they had waded out and cast them away. As I watched them disposing of the mangled remains of Maling, I heard a light footfall behind me, and turning quickly, I saw the big hyena swine perhaps a dozen yards away. His head was bent down, his eyes, bright eyes fixed upon me, his stumpy hands clenched and held close by his side. He stopped in his crouching attitude, then I turned. His eyes were a little averted. For a moment we stood eye to eye. I dropped the whip and snatched the pistol in my pocket, for I meant to kill this brute, the most formidable of any left now upon the island, and the first excuse. This may seem treacherous, but I was so resolved. I was far more afraid of him than any other 2 of the beast folk. His continued life I knew was a threat against mine. I was perhaps a dozen seconds collecting myself. Then I cried, "Salute! Bow down!" His teeth flashed upon me in a snarl. "Who are you?" And that I should, perhaps a little too spasmodically, I drew my revolver, aimed quickly, and fired. I heard him yelp, saw him run sideways and turn. I knew I had missed, and clicked back the conk of my thumb with my thumb for the next shot. But he was already running headlong, jumping from side to side. I dared not risk another miss. Every now and then he looked back at me and his shoulder. He went slanting along the beach. I vanished beneath the driving masses of dense smoke that still were pouring from the enclosure. From time I stood staring at him, turned to my 3 obedient beast folk again and signaled them to drop the body they still carried. Then I went back to pace by the fire where the bodies had fallen and kicked at the sand until the brown blood stains were absorbed and hidden. I dismissed my 3 serfs with wave of hand, went up on the beach into the thickets. I carried my pistol in my hand, my whip thrust in with hatchets in the sling of my arm. I was anxious to be alone, but to think the position I was in was now placed. A dreadful thought was that I was only beginning to realize was that over all this island there was no safe place I could be alone and secure rest or sleep. I had recovered strength amazingly since my landing, but I was still inclined to be nervous and break down under any great stress. I felt I ought to cross the island and establish myself with the beast people, and make myself secure in their confidence, but my heart failed me. I went back to the beach, and turning eastward past the burning enclosure, made a point where a shallow spit of coral ran out towards the reef. Here I could sit down and think, my back to the sea and my face against the last of any surprise. And there I sat, chin on my knees, the sun beating down upon my head, an unspeakable dread in my mind, plotting how I could live on against the hour of my rescue, if ever rescue came. I tried to review the whole situation as calmly as I could, but it was difficult to clear the thing of emotion. I began turning over the land of my mind, the reason of Montgomery's despair. They will change, he said. They are sure to change. And Moreau, what is it that Moreau has said? That the stubborn beast flesh grows day by day back again? Then I came round to the hyena swine. I felt that if I did not kill that brute, he would kill me. The sayer of the law was dead. Worse luck. Now they knew now that they were that one of the whips could be killed even as they themselves were killed. They are peering at me already out of the green masses of ferns and palms over yonder, watching until they came within their spring. What were they plotting against me? What was the hyena swine telling them? My imagination was running away with me into the morass of unsubstantial fears. My thoughts were disturbed by a crying of seabirds towards some black object had been stranded by the waves of the beach and in the enclosure. I knew that the object was, but I had not the heart to go back and drive them off. I began walking along the beach in the opposite direction, designing to come around eastward to the island and so approach the ravine huts without traversing the possible ambuscades of the thickets. Perhaps half a mile along the beach, I became aware of one of my 3 beast folk advancing out of the landward bushes towards me. I was now so nervous that with my own imaginings that I immediately drew my revolver. Even the provocatory gestures of this creature failed to disarm me. I hesitated as he approached. "Go away," I cried. There was something very suggestive of a dog in a cringing attitude of the creature. It retreated a little, very like a dog being sent home, and stopped, looking at me imploringly with canine brown eyes. "Go away," I said. "Do not come near me." "May I not come near you?" I said. "No, go away," I insisted, and snapped my whip. And putting my whip in my teeth, I stood for a stone, and with that treat drove the creature away. And so in solitude I came round the ravine of the beast people, and hiding among the weeds and reeds that separated the crevice from the sea, I watched such them as appeared, trying to judge from their gestures and appearance how death of Moreau and Montgomery and the destruction of the house of Paine affected them. I now know the folly of my cowardice. I kept my courage to level up of the dawn. I had not allowed it to ebb away in solitary thought. I might have grasped a vacant specter of Moreau and ruled over the beast people. As it was lost the opportunity, they sank the position of a mere leader among my fellows. Toward the noon certain, they then came and squatted basking in the hot sand. The imperious voices of hunger and thirst prevailed over my dread. I came out of the bushes, and, revolver in hand, walked down towards these seated figures. One, a wolf woman, turned her head and stared at me, and then the others. None attempted to rise to salute me. I felt too faint and weary to insist, and I let the moment pass. "I want food," I said, almost apologetically, and drawing near. "There is food in the hut," said the ox-boar man, and looking away from me. I passed them, went down to the shadow of the odors and of the almost deserted ravine. In an empty hut, I feasted on some specked and half-decayed fruit, and then, after I had propped some branches and sticks about the opening, I placed myself with the face towards it and my hand upon my revolver. With the exhaustion of at 30 hours claimed its own, I fell into a light slumber, hoping the flimsy barricade I had erected would cause sufficient noise in its removal to save me from surprise. Chapter 21. The Reversion of the Beast Folk. In this way I became one among the beast people in the island of Dr. Moreau. When I awoke, it was dark about me. My arm ached in its bandages. I sat up, wondering at first where I might be. I heard coarse voices talking outside. Then I saw that my barricade had gone, and that the opening of the hut stood clear. My revolver was still in my hand. I heard something breathing, saw something crouched together close beside me. I held my breath, trying to see what it was. It began to move slowly, interminably, and then something soft and warm and moist passed across my hand. All my muscles contracted. I snatched my hand away. The cry of alarm began and was stifled at my throat. Then I realized that what happened sufficiently to stay with my fingers on the revolver. "Who is that?" I said in a hoarse whisper, the revolver still pointed. "I, master. Who are you?" "They say there is no master now, but I know. I carried the bodies into the sea. Oh, walker in the sea, the bodies of those you slew. I am your slave, master." "Are you the one I met on the beach?" "The same, master." The thing was evidently faithful enough, for it might have even fallen upon me as I slept. It is well," I said, extending my hand for other licking kiss. I began to realize what its presence meant, and the tide of my courage flowed. Where are the others?" I asked. "They are mad. They are fools," said the dog man. "Even now they talked together beyond there. They say, 'The master is dead. The other with the whip is dead. The other who walked in the sea as we are. We have no master, no whips, no house of pain anymore. There is an end. We love the law, and we will keep it. But there is no pain, no master, no whips forever again. So they say. I know, master, I know." I felt in the darkness and patted the dogman's head. "It is well," I said. "Presently you will slay them all," said the dogman. "Presently," I answered, "I will slay them all. After certain days and certain things have come to pass, every one of them, save those you spare, every one shall be slain. What the master wishes to kill, the master kills," said the dogman with a certain satisfaction in his voice. "And that their sins may grow," I said. "Let them live in folly until their time is ripe. Let them not know that I am the master. The master's will is sweet," said the dogman, ready to tact of his canine blood. "But one has sinned," I said. "Him I will kill whenever I meet him. When they say to you, 'That is he,' see that you fall upon him, and I will now go to the men and women who are assembled together." For a moment the opening of the hut was blackened by the exit of the dogman. Then I followed and stood up almost in the exact spot where I had been when I heard Moreau and his staghound pursuing me. But now it was night, and all the miasmatic ravine about me was black, and beyond, instead of green sunlit slope, I saw a red fire, before which was hunched grotesque figures moved to and fro. Farther were the thick trees, a bank of darkness fringed above the black lace of the upper branches. The moon was just riding up on the edge of the ravine, and like the bar, its face drove sprite of the vapor and was forever streaming the fumaroles of the island. "Walk by me," I said, nerving myself, side by side, and walked down the narrow way, taking heed of the dim things that peered out at us out of the huts. None about the fire attempted to salute me. Most of them disregarded me ostentatiously. I looked round the hyena swine, but he was not there. Altogether, perhaps 20 of the beast folk squatted, staring into the fire and talking to one another. "He is dead. He is dead. The master is dead," said a voice of the ape man right to the right of me. "The House of Pain. There is no House of Pain. He is not dead," I said in a loud voice. "He watches. Even now, he watches us." This startled them. 20 pairs of eyes regarded me. The House of Pain is gone," I said. "It will come again. The master you cannot see, yet even now he listens among you." True, said the dog man. They were staggered at my assurance. An animal may be ferocious and cunning enough, but it takes a real man to tell a lie. "The man in the bandaged arm speaks a strange thing," said one of the beast folk. "I tell you it is so," I said. "The master in the House of Pain will come again. Woe to be him who breaks the law." They looked curiously at one another. With affection of indifference, I began to chop idly at the ground in front of me with my hatchet. They looked. I noticed and made deep cuts in the turf. And then the satyr raised a doubt. I answered him. Then one of the dappled things objected. Then an animated discussion sprang up around the fire. Every moment I began to feel more convinced in my present security. I talked now without catching my breath, due to the intensity of my excitement that had troubled me at first. In the course of about an hour, I had really convinced several beast folk of the truth of my assertions. Talked most of the others into a dubious state. I kept a sharp eye for my enemy, the hyena swine, but he never appeared. Every now and then a suspicious movement would startle me, but my confidence grew rapidly. Then as the moon crept from the zenith, one by one, listeners began to yawn, showing the oddest teeth in the light of the sinking fire. For the first one and the other retired towards the dent of the ravine, and I, dreading the silence and darkness, went with them, knowing I was safer with several of them than with one alone. In this manner, I began the longer part of my sojourn upon this island of Dr. Moreau. But that night, until the end came, there was one thing that happened to tell a series of innumerable small unpleasant details fretting the incessant uneasiness, so that I prefer to make no chronicle for that gap of time, only to tell of one cardinal incident of the 10 months I spent as an intimate of these half-humanized brutes, so that there is much of that sticks in my memory that I could write, things that I would cheerfully give in my right hand to forget, but they do not help the telling of the story. In the retrospect, it is strange to remember how soon I fell with these monsters' ways and gained my confidence again. I had quarrels with them, of course, and could show them their teeth marks still, but they soon gained a wholesome respect for my trick and of throwing stones at the bite of my hatchet, and my St. Bernard man's loyalty was of infinite service to me. I found their simple scale of honor was based mainly on the capacity of inflicting trenchant wounds. Indeed, I may say, without vanity, I hope that I held something like a preeminence among them. One or two who, in a rare access of high spirits I had scared rather badly, bore me a grudge, but it vented itself chiefly behind my back, a safe distance from my missiles and grimaces. The hyena swine avoided me, and I was always on the alert for him. My insuperable dog-man hated and dreaded him intensely. I really believed that was the root of the brute's attachment to me. It was soon evident to me that the former monster had tasted blood and gone away of the leopard's man. He formed a lair somewhere in the forest and became solitary. Once I tried to induce the beast folk to hunt him, but I lacked the authority to make him cooperate for one end. Again and again I tried to approach his den and come upon him unaware, but always he was too acute for me, and saw or winded me and got away. He too made every forest pathway dangerous to me and my ally with his lurking ambuscades. The dogman scarcely dared to leave my side. In the first month or so of the beast folk, compared with the latter condition, were human enough, and for one or two, beside my canine friend, I conceived a friendly tolerance. A little pink sloth creature displayed an odd affection for me, and I took a following me about. The monkey man bored me, however, he assumed, on the strength of 5 digits, that he was my equal, and was forever jabbering at me, jabbering at the most errant nonsense. One thing about him entertained me a little. He had a fantastic trick of coining new words. He had an idea, I believe, that to gabble about names that meant nothing was proper use of speech. He called it big things, to distinguish it from little things, the sane everyday interests of life. If ever I made a remark he did not understand, he would praise it very much, ask me how to say it, and learn it by heart, go off repeating it with a word wrong or here or there, all to the milder of the beast people. He thought nothing of this plain and comprehensible. I invented some very curious big things for his especial use. I think now he became the silliest creature I have ever met. He had developed the most wonderful and a distinctive silliness of man without losing one jot of natural folly of a monkey. This, I say, was in the earlier weeks of solitude among these brutes. During that time, which respected the usage established by the law, had behaved with a general decorum. Once I found another rabbit torn into pieces by the hyena swine, I am assured, but that was all. That it was about May when I first distinctly perceived a growing difference in their speech and carriage, growing coarseness of articulation, a growing disclination to talk. My monkey man's were multiplied in volume, but grew less and less comprehensible, more and more simian. One of the others seemed altogether slipping their hold upon speech, though they still understood what I said to them at the time. Can you imagine language, once clear-cut and exact, softening and guttering, losing shape and import, becoming mere lumps of sound again? And they walked erect with increasing difficulty, though they evidently were ashamed of themselves. Every now and then I would come upon one or another and running on toes and fingertips, and quite unable to recover the vertical attitude. They held things more clumsy. Drinking by suction, beating by gnawing, grew commoner every day. I realized more keenly than ever what Moreau had told me about the stubborn beast flesh. They were reverting, and reverting very rapidly. Some of them, the pioneers of this, I noticed with last surprise, all were females, began to disregard the junction of decency and deliberately for the most part. The others had attempted public outrages upon the institution of Montgomery. The tradition of the law was clearly losing its force. I could not pursue this disagreeable subject. The dogman imperceptibly slipped back to the dog again. Day by day he became dumb, quadrupedal, hairy. I scarcely noticed the transition from my companion on the right hand was to the lurching dog on my side. As the careless and disorganization increased from day to day, the lame dwelling places, at no time very sweet, became loathsome that I left it, and came across the island made myself a hovel and bows through amid the black ruins of Moreau's enclosure. Some memory of pain, I found, made still that place safest from the beast folk. It would be impossible to detail every step of lapsing of these monsters. To tell it day by day, the human semblance left them. How I gave up bandagings and wrappings, abandoned every last stitch of clothing, and how hair had began to spread over the exposed limbs, how their foreheads fell away from their faces projected, how quasi-human intimacy I had permitted myself with some of them. The first month of my loneliness became shuddering horror to recall. The change was slow and inevitable. For them, for me, it came without any definite shock. I was still among them in safety, because no jolt in my downward glide had realized an increasing charge of explosive animalism that outsetted the human day by day. But I began to fear that soon now that the shock must come. My St. Bernard brute followed me to the enclosure every night, and his vigilance enabled me to sleep at times in something like peace. The little pink sloth thing became shy and left me, to crawl back to its natural life more along the tree branches. We were just in the state of equilibrium that would remain in one of those happy family cages which animal tamers exhibit. If the tamer were to leave it forever, one of those creatures did not decline into such beasts as the reader had seen in zoological gardens, into ordinary bears, wolves, tigers, oxen, swine, and apes. There was still something strange about each, and each Moreau had blended its animal with that. One perhaps was ursine chiefly, another feline chiefly, another bovine chiefly, but each was tainted with other creatures, a kind of generalized animalism appearing through the specific dispositions, and dwindling shreds of humanity still startled me every now and then. A momentary recrudescence of speech, perhaps, an unexpected dexterity of forefeet, pitiful attempt to erect. I too must have strange changes. My clothes hung about me in the yellow rags, though whose rent showed the tanned skin. My hair grew long and became matted together. I am told that even now my eyes have a strange brightness, a swift alertness of movement. First, I spent daylight hours on the southward beach watching for my ship and hoping and praying for a ship. I counted on the Ipecachuana returning as the year wore on, but she never came. 5 times I saw sails and thrice smoke, but nothing ever touched the island. I always had a bonfire ready, but no doubt if the volcanic reputation of the island was taken into account for that. It was only about September or October that I began to think of making a raft. By the time my arm healed, and both my hands were at service again, at first I found my helplessness appalling again. I had never done any carpentry or such like work in my life. I had spent day after day in experimental chopping and binding among trees. I had no ropes and could hit nothing wherewith to make ropes. None of the abundant creepers seemed limber or strong enough, and with all my litter of scientific education I could not devise any way of making them so. I spent more than a fortnight grubbing among the black ruins in the enclosure and on the beach where the boats had been burnt, looking on the nails and the other stray pieces of metal that might prove of service. Now and then the beast creature would catch me and go leaping off when I called to it. I came to a season of thunder, storms, and heavy rain, which greatly retarded my work, but at last the raft was completed. I was delighted with it, but with a certain lack of practical sense which had always been my bane. I had made it a mile or more from the sea before I had dragged it down to the beach and made the thing fall into to pieces. Perhaps it was as well that I saved from launching it, but at my time of misery, my failure was so acute, and for some days I simply moped up on the beach and stared at the water at the thought of death. I did not, however, mean to die, and an incident occurred that warned me unmistakably of the folly letting the days pass so, and for each fresh day was fraught an increasing danger from the beast people. I was lying in the shade of the enclosure wall, staring out of the sea, and when I was startled by something cold touching my skin of my heel, and started hitting round and found the little pink sloth creature blinking into my face. He had long since lost speech and active movements, but the lank hair and of the little brute grew thicker every day, and his stubby claws more askew. He made a moaning noise when he saw he had attracted my attention, went a little way toward the bushes and looked at me. At first I did not understand, but presently it occurred to me that he wished to follow him, and this I did at last, slowly, for a day was hot, and he reached his trees, and he clambered down to them. He could travel better among the swinging creepers on the ground, and suddenly, in a trampled space, I came upon the ghastly group. My St. Bernard creature lay on the ground, dead, and near his body crouched the hyena swine, gripping and quivering flesh, and with his misshapen claws gnawing at it and snarling with delight. As I approached, the monster lifted his glaring eyes to mine, its lips trembling back from its red-stained teeth, and growled menacingly. It was not afraid, not ashamed. The last vestige of human taint had vanished. I advanced a step farther, stopped, and pulled out my revolver. At last I had him face to face. The brute made no sign of retreat, but its ears went back, its hair bristled, its body crouched together. I aimed between the eyes and fired. As I did so, the thing rose straight at me in a leap, and I knocked over like a ninepin. It clutched me with its crippled hand and struck me with its face. Its spring carried it over to me. I fell under the hind of its part of its body, but luckily I had hit as I met. It had died even as it leapt, crawled from under its unclean weight, and stood trembling, staring at its quivering body. The danger was at least over, but this I only knew the day of the series of repulses that must come. I burnt both bodies on pyre of brushwood. But after I saw that unless I left the island, my death was only a question of time. The beast people, by the time, had, or with one or two exceptions, left the ravine and made themselves lairs according to a taste among the thickets of the island. Few prowled by day, most kept them slept, and the island, having seemed deserted to a newcomer, might have but a night air. It was a hideous and with calls and howling, and half a mind to make a massacre of them, and to build traps and fight them with my knife. I had possessed the sufficient cartridges. I should not have hesitated and begin the killing, but could now be scarcely score left on the dangerous carnivores. Braver were those who were already dead. After the death of this poor dog of mine, my last friend, I too adopted the same extent of practice of slumbering in daytime to be on guard on the night. I rebuilt my den and walls of the enclosure with such narrow opening that anything attempting to enter must necessarily make a considerable noise. The creatures had lost the art of fire too, and recovered their fear of it. I turned once more, almost passionately now, to hammering together stakes and branches to form a raft for my escape. I found a thousand difficulties, And I am an extremely unhandy man. My schooling was over before the days of Swolgid, but most of the requirements of the raft I had met at last in some clumsy, citrus way or other, and this time I took care of my strength. Only an insurmountable obstacle was left on the was that I had no vessel to contain the water I should need it if I floated forth upon these untraveled seas. I would have even tried pottery, but the island contained no clay. I used to go mopping about the island, trying to, with all my might, to solve this last one difficulty. Sometimes I would give way to wild outbursts of rage, hack at and splinter at some unlucky tree in my intolerable vexation, but I could think of nothing. And then came a wonderful day, in which I spent ecstasy. I saw a sail to the southwest, a small sail like that of a little schooner, and forthwith I lit a great pile of brushwood and stood by the heat of it, at the heat of the midday sun, watching. All day I watched that sail, eating or drinking nothing, so that my head reeled. The beast came and glared at me. I seemed to wonder it went away, and it was still distant when night came and swallowed it up. And all night I toiled to keep my blaze bright and high, and the eyes of the beast shone out of the darkness, marveling in the dawn of the sail as it drew nearer. I saw it was the dirty lug of a small boat. It sailed strangely. My eyes were weary with watching, and I peered. I could not believe them. 2 men were on the boat, sitting low, only one by the bows and the other at the rudder. The head could not keep to the wind, and yawned and fell away. As the day grew brighter, I began waving my last rag of my jacket at them, but they did not notice me, and sat still, facing each other. I went to the lowest point of the low headland, and gesticulated and shouted. There was no response. The boat kept on her aimless course, making slowly, very slowly, for the bay. Suddenly, a great white bird flew up on the boat, and neither of the men stirred or noticed it, and circled round, and then came sweeping overhead as strong winds outspread. And then I stopped shouting and sat down by the headland and rested my chin on the heads and stared. Slowly, and the boat drove past towards the west. I would have swum out to it, but something, a cold, vague fear, kept me back. In the afternoon, I stranded the boat and left 100 yards or so to the westward ruins of the enclosure. The men in it were dead, had been dead so long that they fell into pieces when I tilted the boat on its side and dragged them out. One had a shock of red hair, like a captain of the Epecachicuna, and dirty white cap lay on the bottom of the boat. As I stood beside the boat, 3 of the beasts came slinking out of the bushes and sniffling towards me. One of my spasms of disgust came upon me. I thrust the little boat down the beach and clambered aboard her. 2 of the brutes were wild wolf beasts, and came forward in quivering nostrils and glittering eyes. The third was of horrible, nondescript bull and bear. And when I saw them approaching the wretched remains, I had heard snarling at one another and caught a gleam of their teeth. A frantic horror succeeded by my repulsion. I turned my back upon them, I struck my lug, and began pedaling out to sea. I could not bring myself to look behind me. I lay, however, between the reef and the island at the night, and the next morning I went around the stream to fill the empty keg abroad with water. Then, with such patience I could command, I collected a quantity of fruit and waylaid and killed 2 rabbits and with my last 3 cartridges. While I was doing this, I left the boat and moored at the inward projection of the reef for fear of the beast people. Chapter 22, final chapter, The Man Alone. In the evening I started. I drove out to sea before a gentle wind from the southwest, slowly, steadily, and the island grew smaller and smaller. The lank spire of smoke drove to a finer and finer line against the hot sunset. The ocean rose up around me, hiding that low, dark patch from my eyes. The daylight, the trailing glory of the sun went streaming out of the sky. It was dawn aside like some luminous curtain, and at last I looked into the blue gulf of immensity which sunshine hides, and saw the floating host of the stars. The sea was silent, the sky was silent. I was alone in the night and silence. So I drifted for 3 days, eating and drinking sparingly and meditating upon all that had happened to me, not desiring to very greatly then to see men again. One unclean rag was about me, my hair but a black tangle. No doubt my discoverers thought me a madman. It is strange, but I felt no desire to return to mankind. I was only glad to quit of the foulness of the beast people, and on the 3rd day I picked up by the brig to Apia to San Francisco. Neither the captain nor the mate would believe my story, judging that solitude and danger would made me mad, and fearing their opinion of others, I refrained from telling my adventure further, and professed to recall nothing that had happened between the loss of the Lady Vane and that time when I picked up again, the space of a year. I had to act with the utmost circumspection to save myself from the suspicion of insanity. My memory of the law, the 2 dead sailors, the ambuscades of the darkness, the body of the canebrake, haunted me, and unnatural as it seems, with my return to mankind came, instead of the confidence and sympathy I had expected, the strange enhancement of uncertainty and dread I had experienced during the stay upon the island. No one would believe me, as almost as queer as a man as I had been to the beast people. I may have caught something natural wildness of companions. They sat in that terror and disease. My troubled look took the strangest form. I could not persuade myself that the men and women were not able to another beast. Animals half wrought into outward image of human souls that would presently begin to revert, to show first in bestial mark, and then that. I have confided my case to a strangely able man, a man who had known Moreau and seemed half credit my story, a mental specialist, and helped me mightily, though I did not expect the terror of the island would altogether leave me. At times it lies as far back of the mind, a distant cloud, a memory, faint distrust, but in times the little cloud spreads until the obscures the whole sky, and then it took